At the beginning, I'm working with a solid piece of walnut wood. The wood is healthy and stable, without any cracks. There are a few small worm holes on the surface, which are typical for naturally aged walnut and do not affect the strength of the piece. In this step, I remove the bark from the surface of the wood. This helps reveal the grain structure and allows me to properly inspect the surface. With the bark removed, I begin rough turning from the outside. At this stage, the goal is not shaping the bowl, but bringing the blank into a true round form. I gradually remove material until the piece runs smoothly on the lathe. This reduces vibration, improves control, and makes the following steps both safer and more accurate. At this stage, I start shaping the outside of the bowl. I'm using a 16mm bowl gouge and working primarily with the push cut technique. This allows for better control and produces a clean, continuous surface. The shape is developed gradually, focusing on smooth transitions and a balanced overall form. During the process, I stop the lathe to check the surface and make sure that all remaining bark has been completely removed. Once the surface is clean, I continue with another push cut to refine the curve and establish the final outer shape of the bowl. At this point, I use a caliper to mark the tenon according to the exact size of the chuck jaws. This step needs to be very precise. Accurate marking ensures that the jaws grip the tenon correctly and prevents visible jaw marks on the finished bowl. After marking, I cut the tenon using a 13mm spindle gouge, keeping the shoulder clean and well defined. At this stage, I first use a round-nosed scraper to smooth the surface. After that, I switch to a pointed scraper, which allows me to scrape from the opposite direction as well. This helps refine the surface and reduces the amount of sanding needed in the next step. In this step, I shape the bottom of the bowl using a round-nosed scraper. This allows me to refine the surface and create a clean, even base. At this stage, I apply Lignoseal from Samson Chemnic to stabilize the areas with visible worm traces. The goal here is not to hide these marks, but to strengthen the affected areas while keeping the natural lines visible. I choose this approach because I don't want to discard a beautiful piece of walnut for purely cosmetic reasons. These marks are a natural part of the material and I want to preserve them rather than remove them. Later in the process, these areas will be additionally reinforced using thin CA glue. After the stabilization step, I sand the outside of the bowl up to 240 grit to prepare the surface for the next stages. At this stage, I mark the areas where the leaf pattern will be placed. The leaves are drawn onto the surface by my wife and they serve as a guide for the carving process. These markings define the layout and provide a clear reference before the carving begins. At this point, you can see the leaf pattern that my wife has drawn on the surface of the bowl. These lines serve as the reference for the carving process and define the final layout of the design. I now begin carving the leaves by hand, carefully following the drawn lines. The carving is done step by step, removing small amounts of material to maintain control and keep the edges clean. During this process, I focus on consistency, depth, and smooth transitions between each leaf. If you're watching this, I'd be interested to know, do you prefer subtle carved details like these or a completely smooth bowl surface? Let me know in the comments. Feedback like this helps me decide how far to push the details in future pieces. When it comes to carved details like these, everyone has a slightly different preference. Some people like very sharp, deep carving with strong contrast. Others prefer softer lines that only become visible under the right light. I'm curious to know what you personally look for in a carved wooden piece. Do you prefer bold, clearly defined patterns or more subtle details that blend into the surface? Let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading how different people respond to the same design. At this stage, I sand the surface of the bowl progressively up to 400 grit. This level of sanding helps remove fine tool marks and evens out the surface. A smoother surface at this point ensures that the finish will apply evenly and results in a soft, silky sheen once the bowl is fully finished. At this stage, I apply our own finish, which is made from a blend of carnauba wax and tung oil. This is the same finish that we also offer in our online shop, with the link shown in the top right corner and available through our Etsy store as well. After applying the finish, I attach the chuck jaws, turn the bowl around and mount it back on the lathe for the next step. At this stage, I begin working on the inside of the bowl. I start with a 16mm bowl gouge sharpened to a 40-degree bevel. This grind works well for controlled cutting and allows me to remove material efficiently while maintaining stability. I work gradually from the center outward, focusing on a smooth transition between the walls and the base. Because this is a longer step, I'd like to ask you something. When you watch bowl turning, do you prefer seeing the full hollowing process, or would you rather see shorter, faster cuts with more focus on the final result? Let me know in the comments. It helps me decide how detailed future videos should be. As I approach the bottom of the bowl, I switch to a 13mm gouge with a lower bevel angle. This allows me to better shape the base and refine the transition between the walls and the bottom, which is difficult to achieve with a 40-degree bowl gouge. Using the right tool and bevel angle here makes a noticeable difference in both control and surface quality. At this stage, I switch to a round nose scraper to further smooth the inside of the bowl. The scraper helps remove any remaining tool marks and evens out the surface, especially in areas where the grain direction changes. I work carefully and with light pressure to avoid tearing the fibers and to keep the surface consistent. This step prepares the inside of the bowl for the next stage, which is sanding. At this stage, I sand the inside of the bowl using the same approach as on the outside. The goal is to achieve a smooth and even surface while maintaining the final shape. This bowl is available on our website as well as in our Etsy shop with the link shown in the top right corner. Consistent sanding on the inside ensures a uniform feel before moving on to the final steps. At this stage, I apply our own finish, which I introduced earlier in the video. I chose this finish because it enhances the natural color of the walnut while keeping the surface feeling natural to the touch. The combination of tung oil and carnauba wax provides protection without creating an artificial shine. After applying the finish, I remove the bowl from the lathe and prepare it for attaching our logo to the base. At this point, I attach our logo to the bottom of the bowl. With that, the bowl is now complete. Thank you for taking the time to watch this process from start to finish. If you enjoy this kind of craftsmanship, consider subscribing to the channel to see more projects like this in the future. And as always, thank you for your support and for watching.